What's up, you guys? Welcome to my channel. Whether you are new here or not, thank you so much for choosing me today. So today I am going to be speaking about the Wemmer Pan serial killer. Okay, so this guy, Cedric, was so chaotic and so problematic between the years 1996 and 1997 to the point where the police and investigators thought that two serial killers were at large. Now, this was not an uncommon thing. It was definitely not unheard of. It's been done before, where two serial killers will be active at the same time. But this guy would give the police a run for their money. He was noted as one of the worst serial killers to come out of South Africa. And what made him fall into this category is the fact that he was not your typical serial killer. This case, the Cedric Maake case, was also a case that was handed to Pete Byleveld. Now, if you have watched my Leigh Matthews case, if not, I will link it below. I speak briefly about Pete Byleveld. He was one of South Africa's top detectives, like world renowned, and he specialized in serial killings. So this is one of the cases that he cracked, and I could go on and on and on about Mr. Pete Byleveld, but I will say that for a series that I'm wanting to start called the Pete Byleveld series. I've been reading Hanlie Retief's book. It's called Byleveld, Dossier of a Serial Sleuth, and it is the most gripping book I have ever read in a long time. I've been glued to it for the past 2 days, and I've got 10% left and I'm done. And obviously Cedric Maake is one of the cases that is spoken about in this book. It is not a biography. It simply focuses on Pete's cases and shows how he handled serial killers, which is super interesting. And you also tap into the mind of a serial killer. You are literally reading this book and it's as if you are sitting with Pete and listening to all the stories. It even has a bonus of pictures that are in the book of, you know, crime scenes and stuff like that, which is so up my alley. So I highly recommend it. But without wasting any more time, let's dive into this case. Cedric was born Maupa or Maupa Cedric Maake. I am not sure if that is the correct pronunciation. I will just put it on the screen. He was born on the 10th of September 1963, and as a serial killer he was active between the years 1996 and 1997. Cedric's father died when he was in grade 10, and after his death he had to leave school so that he could find work to care for his family. He had a mom and they grew up and lived in Limpopo. Cedric also had a wife and 4 children, and he also had a girlfriend in Johannesburg. At age 33, he was living in La Rochelle in Johannesburg, and it would be at this age where he would randomly start his life of crime. On the 28th of December 1996 would be the beginning of what South Africa would know as the Hammer series. Antonio Alfonso was working at Hills Garden Cafe in Rosettenville. While he was working, minding his own business, Cedric attacked him with a hammer out of nowhere. Cedric stole 400 rand from the cash register and fled the scene. Antonio survived though. It is December in 1996. With the money that Cedric stole from Antonio, he would use that money to celebrate the new year. Shortly after that incident, on the 6th of Jan 1997, Cedric would strike again. He would come in like a normal customer, inquiring on certain items, sometimes even purchasing certain items, and he would ask for certain things, and the moment the tailor shop owner would turn their backs, that's when he would strike with a hammer. He would aim for the head, and once he has struck the tailor shop owner, he would proceed to steal money from the cash register and items like the shop owner's wallet or certain items from the shop itself. On the 17th of January 1997, Cedric visited Kantilal Lachman's store. Cedric walks in, and like always, he is a normal customer. Cedric said that he needed alterations, which, okay, fine. He was, provided with the service. But then Cedric also wanted to purchase a pair of shoes, which he was able to do so by way of lay-by. So he paid the deposit to Kantilal, and on the receipt, he did not put his real name. Instead, he signed the receipt with the alias Patrick Mokoena. Now, this is a very important detail, and as we go along with the story, you will see why. So just jot that somewhere, make a mental note that he used the alias Patrick Mokoena. Then Cedric decides to, fill Kantilal in on the fact that his hammerhead is loose. Okay, so Kantilal, offers his help and directs him to a hardware store which is nearby to Kantilal's tailor shop. Cedric, takes his advice and visits the hardware store. Cedric got his hammer repaired. He came back to Kantilal's store claiming that now he wants underwear. And I'm sure you can kind of see where the story is going. Kantilal turns his back to reach for the underwear that he is asking for, and before we know it, Kantilal is on the floor. Cedric had struck him with his hammer. Cedric then steals Kantilal's wallet, and he forgets, well, I don't know if he forgets, but he so happened to leave his hammer in Kantilal's shop when he fled. Kantilal suffered several fractures and brain damage as well, which was another thing. His first set of victims survived. Like, a lot of them survived, which I don't know if it was just him being clumsy. Maybe he, thought he hit hard enough, but a lot of them survived his attacks, which later served in the police's favor because then they had a lot of victims until the 23rd of January 1997, which is my birthday. Cedric walked into Dansuklal Patel's tailor shop, and Mr. Patel's tailor shop would be in downtown Johannesburg. Cedric bludgeoned Mr. Patel with a hammer, and unfortunately for Mr. Patel, he did not survive this attack, and he would be Cedric's very first kill. Then another non-typical thing about Cedric as a serial killer, well, I guess you wouldn't consider him a serial killer yet because, you know, according to the facts, you are considered a serial killer after you have killed 3 or more people. Okay, so P is an attacker, just an attacker at this point. On the 27th of Feb 1977, Cedric would work with an accomplice, okay? Totally unheard of when it comes to serial killers, right? Cedric attacked 63-year-old Amatlale Gopal with a hammer and stole his wallet, right? But Amatlale would not even remember the attack because of the brain damage that he suffered. By the end of April 1997, Cedric would have been involved in 11 attacks. Now, back in the day, the police system was not as advanced as it is today. So they did not have a system that could link these attacks or link these murders so that the system zones into one MO and kind of categorizes it as a serial killing. The Hammer series was Cedric, well, unbeknownst to everyone, it was Cedric going into these tailor shops and hammering people around. Some survived, a lot survived, but a good number of them died as well. And then out of the blue, okay, Cedric would switch it up a notch. Okay, so he decided to take a break from the tailor shop owners and he decided to target Wemmer Pan. Now Wemmer Pan is basically like a lover's lane. There is a lake, there are recreational areas, so I guess like park vibes. It comes across as a very romantic area where couples would go and spend some time together. And on the 27th of April 1997 was when the Wemmer Pan series would begin. He would randomly creep up on couples. If you are in a car, he would shoot the man first, usually at the back of the man's head, and then he would proceed to rape the woman and then kill her. In some instances, he would have the couples sleep together, be intimate with each other while he watched, and then proceed to kill the man and then rape the woman and finally kill her. But what was also crazy about Cedric was the fact that sometimes he let his victims go. Depending on how much you begged for your life, he would literally put you in a taxi, give you some money, and make sure you get home, which is also very, very weird. And it's not like he did this once. He did this with several of his victims. Of course, he would rape them first, but lucky for them, they didn't have to die, you know. So that was also very, very weird about Cedric, especially since he is labeled a serial killer. And he also had this weird obsession with shoes where if he killed a woman, he would take one of her shoes. And if he killed a man, he would take both of his shoes. And it was reported that he would take all these stolen goods and leave them at his mother's place, with his mother at her place. So for Wemmer Pan, he ditched the hammer and started using a gun. 58-year-old Elijah and his girlfriend Eunice were enjoying some time together at Wemmer Pan, where out of nowhere Cedric approaches them They were in his Toyota Cressida car, and out of nowhere, Cedric is by his car window and shoots Elijah at the back of his head, killing him instantly and without warning. He then forces Eunice out of the car, where he leads her to a mine dump and kills her there as well. Now, when police went to Elijah's home address, they were met with his wife. And not only did they have to let his wife know that Elijah was now killed, but that was the point at which she learned that Elijah had an affair. Can you imagine? And these types of deaths would happen weekend after weekend. On the 25th of May 1997, Cedric switched it up again. He took a break from Wemmer Pan and started attacking taxi drivers. So what he would do is he would, get into a taxi and stay in the taxi until he was the last passenger. He would specify to the driver where he would like to be dropped off, and before he left, he would come by to the taxi driver's window and shoot at the taxi drivers. Now, he did this with 2 taxi drivers, shooting at them several times, but they both survived, which is absolutely amazing. So after the second taxi driver, he decided to just stop, killing taxi drivers or attacking taxi drivers. So once he was done with the taxi drivers, he targeted Wemmer Pan again, Moses and Dorcas. So Cedric shot Moses dead. Okay, Moses and Dorcas were a couple, and then he forced Dorcas to take a walk with him. He raped her twice, and then eventually he put her in a taxi so that she can get home. But what is incredibly disturbing about Cedric was the fact that he had tried to arrange a date with Dorcas. And not only that, but he casually asked if she would be attending her boyfriend Moses' funeral. Now, at this point, police were at their wits' end. What is going on? Who are these serial killers? People are dying left, right, and center. It is a weekly occurrence that bodies are just dropping like flies. So this case was handed to Mr. Pete Byleveld. And Cedric was very much still active in his killing sprees, where he even killed 15-year-old Leilani van Wyk and her 19-year-old boyfriend, Martin Stander. Okay, Leilani was Cedric's youngest victim, and the couple had come back from a club, and they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and Cedric killed them both. Now, with all the commotion and the chaos, the community was talking, the victims were talking amongst themselves. There was frustration, there was impatience. The community felt like the police are just not doing enough. For Pete, having the case being handed to him, he felt immense pressure because he hated losing. He hates losing. So he didn't need much to motivate him to find the killer. He hated crime with a passion, and he did not have a corrupt bone in his body. So when he was handed this case, he worked day and night. It came with a lot of frustration because he could not link the two murder series. He could not link, he didn't even know that there should be a link, because the police thought that, you know, they're dealing with two separate serial killers. So there were separate files for the Hammer series and the Wemmer Pan series. So Pete came up with a plan to put surveillance on a few of the shops that the killer would attack, to catch him on tape red-handed. Now, because of the frustration of the community and the victims and everybody talking amongst themselves, the community reached out to the mayor and the media, and long story short, the media ended up exposing Pete's entire plan to catch this serial killer. And it was such a blow to Pete, because this was a big setback because of impatience and the people believing that the police are not doing enough. Pete had to call off on his entire plan, and things such as the victims' names were even exposed in the media. And of course, this grew fear for Pete, because he thought, what if the serial killer goes back to finish what he started, since there were so many survivors from his attack. Now, on the 28th of November 1997, another attack. Gerard Laveau was riding his bike in Wemmer Pan when he was shot at the back of his head and killed instantly by Cedric. Cedric stole his bike and fled the scene. Meanwhile, Pete was obsessing over this trial. He did not sleep over it. Now, Pete was a big believer of revisiting crime scenes. He never looked at a crime scene once. He would go back twice, 3 times, 4 times. He would speak to the community members, find out information. He'd want to know information about the victim. He would go back and look at the crime scenes at different angles, at different perspectives, because there was always something that you could possibly miss, where if you went back to the crime scene, you would catch that very thing that could help you crack the case, which this 100% worked in Pete's favor. At one of the crime scenes, he had found a Kleenex tissue which appeared to have some sort of DNA on it. So he obviously grabbed that for forensics, and he had also spoken to a lot of the victims that had survived Cedric's attacks. Now, at this point, they didn't know that it was Cedric, okay? He was just a suspect, a nameless suspect. But the Kleenex tissue, together with the description of this killer, helped Pete along in this case. So Pete tried another tactic, okay? So he decided to set up a trap with his colleague, Rihanna, okay? A female detective. So they decided to pretend to be a couple at Wemmer Pan in a car, and just wait to see and be on the lookout for the Wemmer Pan killer. So they waited in the car for about 9 hours, and because it was getting dark, Pete was starting to fear for his colleagues' safety. So they said, okay, let's call it a day. We can regroup another time. And just as they had started the car engine, they got radioed in, and a detective or police officer that was on standby told them that just as they drove off, a man had been sneaking up on them. And Pete was so bummed, because he could have put a face to this killer. And this set Cedric off, because the following day he had killed 5 people in one day, causing more stress and pressure for Pete. Finally, in December of 1997, an informant called the police to report on a man, a strange man that is just loitering around a nearby hotel. So this informant was probably in the hotel, and something seemed very strange about this man that was loitering around. He wasn't booked in at the hotel. He wasn't buying food, he wasn't eating, he wasn't dining, he wasn't lunching, he wasn't anything. He's just randomly loitering around the hotel. And when the informant gave the police the description of this man, that description matched that of the victim's description of the killer. Now, the informant also let police know that they assume that the strange man is dating a lady who works at a nearby dog parlor, and this lady's name is Angelina. So of course Pete was notified of this information coming from the informant, and because his surveillance plan failed for the tailor shop owners, he decided to put surveillance on Angelina, because if the descriptions of this man match, chances are Pete got his man. So they put surveillance on Angelina, and this would be on the 23rd of December 1997. At 11 a.m., Angelina got into a taxi traveling towards Jeppe or Yeppie. Near the railway station, I guess at her destination, she was waiting there for somebody until this man who matched the description of the informant and the victims appeared. As described, he was wearing green trousers and a grey jersey. And boom, it was Cedric Maake. So there and then, Pete made an arrest and transported him to the Brixton Murder and Robbery Unit. Blood was drawn from Cedric so that they could compare it to the DNA that they had captured from victims, along with that Kleenex tissue. And as you may have guessed it, the DNA matched. So what Pete would do with serial killers, he would firstly refer to them as his clients, and he would build a trust with them, and he would use things that they loved. He would find their sweet spot and their soft spot and their weak spot to use that against them and have them gain a trust with him so that they can spew everything about the murders they'd committed. His goal was to get a confession out of his clients. It would take one random question, maybe it wasn't random, but one question to piece the puzzle together. Now, when talking about Gerard Lavu, the victim that Cedric killed for his bike, Pete asked him, "What did you do with the bike?" And Cedric said that it's at a pawn shop. Now, another thing that Pete would do is that he would book his clients, the serial killers, out of the holding cells so that they could show him all the murder scenes, the crime scenes, where they hid the stolen goods, all of that, and capture it on camera as evidence, like they are, to point at certain things to confirm that, okay, this is what I did, and it would be captured on camera. So Cedric had taken Pete to Billy's pawn shop, and this was on the 12th of January 1998. Okay, and upon looking at the receipt that Cedric was given for the bike. He had sold the bike to the pawn shop for 120 rand. And on the receipt, it was signed as Patrick Mokoena. Remember, I told you to make a mental note of when he bought those shoes on lay-by? Exactly. And Pete was like, wait a minute. I've heard of that name before. Patrick Mokoena. You see, this was Cedric's mistake. He had used the same alias twice. And then it hit Pete like a ton of bricks. Oh my gosh. Not only is Cedric the hammer killer, you are also the Wemmer Pan killer. This was major. And of course, Cedric admitted to everything. He spewed everything. Pete got his confession. And in communicating with Cedric, Pete would learn that Cedric had targeted tailor shop owners because, first of all, he would need alterations because when he was raping women, the woman would fight back and tear his clothes. So he would go to tailor shops to get his alterations done. And then one of the tailor shop owners obviously mended Cedric's shirt in a way that he did not like. So that was the trigger to start killing them. How unnecessary. For the Wemmer Pan murders, he targeted Wemmer Pan because his wife had actually cheated on him, and when she would go out on dates with her boyfriend, they would go to Wemmer Pan. So that was his motivation for killing random couples at Wemmer Pan. Now, what I did not mention was the fact that Cedric also got into home invasions. He would break into people's home and kill white elderly men and steal television sets and video machines and guns if that particular owner had a gun, and of course shoes. And the reason why he targeted white elderly men was because one other white elderly man didn't pay him enough for a job that he was doing. So finally, this case was watertight, as Pete would describe his case when he has everything that he needs to convict somebody. The trial lasted 358 days, and Pete described Cedric to be the worst of the worst. He was simply cold, 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 with no remorse, no emotion whatsoever. Cedric was facing 134 charges, and his sentencing consisted of 27 life sentences, an additional 1,159 years for the 27 murders, 26 attempted rapes, 14 rapes, 41 robberies, 11 counts of attempted robberies, and a total of 2,214 years in prison. He was sentenced to C-Max, which is a maximum security prison in Pretoria. And Pete described him to be a volcano that would only erupt as far as his isolated cell would allow it. He would no longer be within society to erupt the way he did, killing innocent people for no reason at all. And Pete described this to be his most complex case, but thankfully justice was served. With that being said, guys, that is the Cedric Maake case. It is so intense. I will be leaving the title of Hanlie Retief's book, you know, focusing on Pete's work, and I will definitely be starting that series. But anyway, please let me know what you think about this case. Were you aware of this type of serial killer in our country? Definitely shocking to hear what he did. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Like, share, do all that stuff. Subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you so much if you did. And guys, remember to be grateful for your life, because you are always loved and needed. And with that being said, peace out.